Job is famous for losing everything, but almost nobody talks about the moment before everything was taken away. Because before Job became the man who lost everything, he was the man everyone thought could never lose anything. Job had the kind of life people spend years trying to build. He had wealth. He had respect. He had a large family. He had a reputation as someone who did what was right. To everyone watching from the outside, Job looked like someone who had already won. No major problems. No obvious cracks. No reason to expect disaster. Basically, Job looked like the person everyone secretly compares themselves to. The guy who somehow got everything right. But that is exactly why his story becomes interesting. Because Job's greatest test did not begin when his life was broken. It began when his life looked perfect. And that changes the entire story. This was not a man who was already struggling. This was not someone searching for a way out. This was someone who had stability, comfort, and everything people usually believe will protect them. Until suddenly, none of it could. In a short amount of time, the things Job spent years building started disappearing. His wealth, his security, his future. The image people had of him, everything that made people say, Job has it all together, started falling apart. And that is where the real question appeared. Because losing possessions is painful. But losing the life someone thought they understood creates a different kind of crisis. The question was not, what did Job lose? The real question was, who is Job when the things that defined him are gone? That was the battle nobody could see. Because sometimes the hardest thing to lose is not what someone owns, it is the version of themselves they believed they were. It is like spending years building the perfect house, only to discover overnight that the foundation was never as unbreakable as it seemed. And the strange part? Job never saw it coming. He was not looking for a challenge. He was not preparing for a disaster. He was simply living the life everyone wished they had, until the story changed. Because sometimes the biggest tests do not arrive when people are ready. They arrive when everything feels safe. And Job was about to discover that losing everything was only the beginning. The real danger was not what the world could take from him. It was what the pain could turn him into. The worst part of Job's story was not just losing everything. It was what happened after. Because when someone experiences a disaster, people usually want one thing, an explanation. And Job wanted one too. He was not only asking, why did I lose everything? He was asking, why did this happen when I was doing everything right? And that question was much harder. Because losing something is painful. But losing something without understanding why it happened creates a different kind of struggle. Then Job's friends arrived, and at first, they did everything right. They showed up. They sat with him. They stayed silent. For 7 days, they did not try to fix him. They did not give advice. They did not create theories. They simply stayed. And honestly, that was probably the best thing they did. Because sometimes people do not need an explanation. Sometimes they need someone who can sit with the problem. But eventually, the silence ended. And that is when Job's second battle began. Because his friends did not arrive trying to hurt him. They arrived believing they could solve him, and that was the problem. First came Eliphaz. He was the type of person who believed every disaster had a hidden lesson. Every problem needed a reason. Every loss needed an explanation. Basically, Eliphaz looked at a complicated tragedy and thought, there has to be a simple answer somewhere. Then came Bildad. Bildad trusted rules more than situations. For him, life worked almost like a formula. Good people should have good results. Bad results meant something went wrong. Simple, organized, comfortable. Except Job's life had just become the opposite of simple. Then came Zophar. And Zophar had something every difficult conversation eventually gets. The person who is completely sure they are right. The kind of person who enters a complicated situation and somehow already has the answer before hearing the whole story. Basically, Job was sitting in the middle of the worst moment of his life, and his friends arrived like a 3-person investigation team. They had theories, they had opinions, they had conclusions, but Job still had questions. That was the real conflict. Job was searching for meaning. His friends were searching for a reason to explain him. And those are not the same thing. It is like losing your job, your home, and your stability. and someone showing up 5 minutes later saying, "I already know exactly where you went wrong." That was the pressure Job faced. He lost his possessions, he lost his security, and now he had to defend himself against people who believed they already understood his entire story. The strange part? His friends were not villains. They were people who genuinely believed they were helping. And sometimes that is what makes things harder. Because the most difficult voices are not always the ones trying to destroy someone. Sometimes they are the voices trying to explain a pain they never experienced. But Job was about to face something even harder than their opinions. Because the next battle was not against his friends, it was against the thoughts forming inside his own mind. The voices around him were getting louder, and soon, Job would have to face the moment when even he started wondering how much more he could take. Everyone remembers Job as the man who stayed strong, the man who lost everything, the man who refused to give up. But that is not the whole story, because before Job became the example of endurance, he became something much more relatable. He became someone who struggled. Job was not a robot. He was not standing there with perfect answers while his entire life collapsed. He was a person trying to understand something that made no sense, and eventually, he stopped pretending he had no questions. After losing his wealth, his family, and his health, Job reached the point where silence was no longer enough. He wanted answers. He wanted meaning. He wanted to understand why everything changed so quickly. And this is the part people often skip, because the famous version of Job is simple. Job was patient, but the real version was more complicated. Job questioned. Job complained. Job struggled. He was not pretending everything was fine. And honestly, that is what makes the story interesting, because staying calm when life is easy is not exactly impressive. The real test begins when life stops following the plan. It is like the person everyone knows as the strong one, finally reaching the moment where even they say, "I don't know what to do anymore." That was Job. The man people expected to have answers was now searching for them himself. And the pressure was coming from everywhere. His friends wanted explanations, people expected strength. Everyone had an opinion about what Job should do. The strange part, everyone had advice. Nobody had his pain. It was almost like Job went from being the person everyone respected to being the person everyone suddenly wanted to correct. His friends were trying to solve the situation, but Job was trying to survive it. And those are two very different things, because sometimes the hardest part of suffering is not only what happens, it is feeling like you are not even allowed to struggle. Job was fighting two battles at the same time, the disaster around him and the storm inside him. And this is where he almost lost the most important battle, not the battle over his possessions, not the battle over his reputation, the battle over who he would become. Because pain does not only take things away. Sometimes it tries to replace them. It tries to turn disappointment into bitterness. It tries to turn questions into hopelessness. It tries to convince someone that their worst moment is the only thing left about them. And Job was standing right in front of that choice. The pain had already taken almost everything from him. Now it was testing whether it could take the last thing he still controlled, his response. Because the real challenge was never proving that Job was perfect. It was discovering what Job would do when he was far from perfect. And soon the pressure would reach its highest point, because the world around Job was waiting for him to break. And the next moment would reveal whether everything he believed could survive the moment everything else was gone. After everything Job lost, there was one moment everyone was waiting for. Not the moment when he lost his wealth, not the moment when his life changed, the moment after. Because when everything someone has built disappears, people start watching one thing: what happens next. The situation was already terrible, but the real question was about Job's response. Would the pain change him? Would the loss define him? Would the worst moment of his life become the person he was? Because that is the part nobody talks about. Losing things is painful, but losing the person someone used to be can be even worse. Job had lost his wealth. He had lost his security. He had lost his health. He had lost the future he thought was guaranteed. And now he was standing with almost nothing left. His friends had explanations. The people around him had opinions. Everyone seemed to know what Job should think. Everyone had advice. Conveniently, almost nobody had his problems, and that created the final pressure. Because when someone is suffering, there is always a temptation to let the pain take control. To say, "This is who I am now. This is all my life will ever be. This is the end of my story." And Job had every reason to think that way. Nobody would have been surprised. Nobody would have blamed him. After everything he experienced, giving up would have been the easiest reaction. But that was the choice in front of him. Not whether he was hurting, he was. Not whether he had questions, he did. The question was, would his pain decide who he became? Because pain always tries to take more than what it already took. A loss can become an identity. A failure can become a label. A difficult season can become the entire story. And Job was standing at that exact moment. The world had already taken away almost everything he could see. But there was still one thing nobody could take from him: his response. That was the real battle. Not getting his possessions back. Not winning an argument with his friends. Not proving everyone else wrong. The battle was staying himself when everything around him was changing. Because anyone can look strong when life is easy. Anyone can be confident when everything is working. But character is revealed when life stops cooperating. That was why Job mattered. He was not remembered because he never struggled. He was remembered because struggle did not become his identity. The pain was real. The questions were real. The loss was real. But the choice was still his. And after everything was taken away, that choice became the only thing that truly remained. Because losing everything was painful. But losing himself would have been the real defeat. And that was the one thing Job refused to give away. People usually remember Job because of everything he lost. The wealth, the comfort, the life he built. But that is not why his story survived for thousands of years. Because losing everything was only the beginning. The real story was about what Job refused to lose. At the start, Job had everything people usually connect with success. A good reputation, a stable life, a family, security. From the outside, it looked like he had already won. Then everything changed. His possessions disappeared. His comfort disappeared. His certainty disappeared. And suddenly, the man who seemed to have every answer was facing the biggest question of his life. Why? That question followed Job through the entire story. But here is the detail many people miss. Job's strength was never that he had no questions. It was that his questions did not control him. He struggled, he doubted, he felt the weight of what happened. But he refused to let his worst moment decide who he would become. Because that is what pain tries to do. Pain does not only take things away, it tries to rewrite the story. It tries to turn one terrible moment into someone's entire identity. A loss becomes a label. A failure becomes a definition. A difficult season becomes the whole story. And Job had every reason to let that happen. Nobody would have been surprised. After everything he experienced, giving up would have been the easiest reaction. But that was exactly what made his choice different. The man who lost almost everything still had one thing left: his decision. He could not control what happened to him. He could not control what others said about him. He could not control how quickly his life changed. But he could choose what kind of person he would be in the middle of it. And that is why Job is remembered. Not because he never broke down. Not because he always understood. Not because suffering was easy for him. He is remembered because suffering never became the owner of his story. The world took away almost everything people could see, but it could not take away the one thing nobody else could control: his response. That is the strange irony of Job's story. The man who lost almost everything became famous because of the one thing he refused to lose: his character, his choice, the person he decided to remain. Because Job did not become unforgettable because life was good to him. He became unforgettable because life was not good to him, and he still refused to become someone he was not. That is why the story continues, not because Job had a perfect life, but because when everything fell apart, he proved that losing everything does not mean losing yourself.